Leviticus 18, please, if you'll turn your Bible there. In the Old Testament, you'll be ready to start with me in just a moment. But first, let me again extend my appreciation for all of you for coming. We do have a number of guests, and we appreciate you being here. I think we have some folks who haven't been here before, and we're very, very glad to have you. You're always welcome, and if we can be of some assistance to you in any way, please let us know. We have some older members who have not been able to be with us recently, who are with us today. You're always an encouragement to me, as I know you are to each of us. So thank you for coming. I know you want to be here if you can and when you can, and you are. So thank you. We have a number of younger people, I think, here this morning as well who have not been here before. So thank you for coming. I want to talk to you this morning about something that is pretty prevalent in our world. In the bulletin this morning, I think I entitled this lesson, "Can It Get Much Worse?" I don't have that on any of my charts this morning, but that really is the principal idea that I want to talk to you about this morning. As the children of Israel began their trek toward the Promised Land, one of the things that God did was He tried to prepare them for the godless influence of the Canaanites. He knew where they were going, and He knew that when they got there, they were going to encounter a godless people. And we know that when they displaced the Canaanites from the land of Canaan, we know that to some degree it went well, to another degree it didn't go well. And part of the problem is that the laws that God had inserted, if you will, or the laws that God had said they needed to follow, weren't necessarily followed. There were laws about a lot of things that God wanted the Israelites to follow, but they inclined themselves to follow, in many cases, what the Canaanites did. Part of the reason God gave them the land that He gave them was to displace the Canaanites. That wasn't all of it, but that was part of it. And in Leviticus 18 and verse 25, the text tells us that the Lord said, "For the land is defiled, therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants." May I just say it this way? We don't like to talk about vomit. Probably the thought makes us nauseous. Certainly, when we hear the term, we envision certain things. And what this text tells us in very graphic language, I think, that there was a perversion that the Canaanites were involved with that probably made God nauseous, but it also probably has to do with God's reaction to it. It's not just what they did, but it's God's reaction to that as well. As a matter of fact, the terms perversion and perverts are words that create the same nausea and repulsion for all of us as we think about how these words are used in our society. Most of the time, at least in recent times, we think of those who are engaged in sexual perversion as engaging in some unusually godless form of sexual activity. And usually when we think of perversion, we're thinking about people who engage themselves in activity that none of us can even imagine. We hear about it. We talk about it in terms of thinking about what others are engaged in. And when we do, it's hard for us, I think, to bring that into our minds and say, there are actually people who engage in those kind of things. Whether we're talking about children or whether we're talking about other things that would make all of us nauseous. One such act is mentioned in Leviticus 18 and verse 21. God said, "You shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire of Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." In Leviticus 20, beginning in verse 1, it may be difficult for you to read. I wanted to get this whole text on one screen. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Again you shall say to the children of Israel, whoever of the children of Israel or of the strangers who dwell in Israel, who gives any of his descendants to Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones, and I will set my face against that man, and I'll cut him off from his people, because he has given some of his descendants to Molech, to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land should in any way hide their eyes from the man, when he gives some of his descendants to Molech, and they do not kill him, then I will set my face against that man and against his family. And I will cut him off from his people and all who prostitute themselves with him to commit harlotry with Molech." Deuteronomy 12. "When the Lord your God cuts off from before you the nations which you go to dispossess, and you displace them and dwell in their land, you take heed to yourself, that you're not ensnared to follow them after they are destroyed from before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, 'How did these nations serve their gods?' I will also do likewise. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. For every abomination to the Lord which he hates they have done to their gods, for they burn even their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods." Deuteronomy 18 and verse 10. "There shall not be found any among you who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire." The warning is repeated over and over again in the Old Testament. Molech, or some translations say Moloch, or some translations say Milcom. But Molech was likely a god of Semitic origin, and he was ultimately adopted as the national god of the Ammonites. 1 Kings 11 calls him Milcom. That's the passage that Jerry read for us as we began our service this morning. The worship of Milcom or Molech had something to do with Baal worship. Now let me show you something that's going to shock you. This is what Jerry read. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord and did not fully follow the Lord, as did his father David. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Can you imagine the king of Israel doing this? It's one thing for the Canaanites to be involved in that kind of activity, and as atrocious as it is, Solomon went after it as well. Solomon, what do we say about him? Man, one time we talk about him and he's the best there ever was, and the other time we talk about him, we can't believe he's even who he says he is. But he built a place of worship for Molech. 2 Kings 16 tells us that Ahaz, who was the king of Judah, made his son pass through the fire. It's obviously what he's talking about. 2 Kings 21 and verse 6 says that Manasseh did it too. Now, we're not surprised about Manasseh. But the kings of God's people did these things. And apparently Israel focused its worship, its Molech worship, at a place called Topheth in the Hinnom Valley southwest of Jerusalem. And in this valley, the people, the children of Israel, would kill their children. They would offer their bodies as sacrifice. You find that hard to believe, don't you? The people of God did this, folks. Ancient accounts tell us that the Phoenician people of Carthage did the same thing. And they didn't kill them and then offer them. They offered them And that killed them. I think the picture is painted for you. The image of Molech was a human figure, obviously with a bull's head, and outstretched arms ready to receive children as a sacrifice. The image of metal was heated by the fire that was lit behind this particular altar, and the children would be heated, and then they would roll off into the fire below. There's an offering to Molech. Well, King Josiah was a good king. He's one of the 5 good ones, right? We remember Josiah. 2 Kings 23 and verse 10 tells us, and Josiah defiled Topheth. That's the place that it took, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter pass through the fire to Molech. Well, Josiah tried to stop it. And there was a sense in which he limited what was done, but the practice persisted really until Judah was taken into Babylonian captivity, which was several years after the fact. Can you imagine? Is there anything that I could stand up here and tell you that God's people did that would be more repulsive to you than for me to tell you that they offered their children as sacrifice to basically a pagan god? Is there anything I could tell you that would make you sicker than that? I don't think I'd do justice to it, because it's couple thousand years later, and I'm standing before you here, and we're talking about something that none of us have seen personally, not like this. Yet, human beings in our history and in the history of the world have engaged in such atrocities. Can you imagine the outcry if we suggested to burn your kids for God Day? Can you imagine the outcry of not only believers, but of the world if I even suggested that today, in place of our worship, today sacrifice your kids to God Day? Is our society too advanced for such kind of behavior? We might think, oh yes, we're too civilized, we're too cultured, too enlightened. You know where I'm going with this, don't you? We won't burn babies, but we'll abort them. Our society is sick, and our society is getting sicker. Can it get much worse? Most of us are aware of recent legislation in the state of New York that, according as I understand the law, that would give a mother the right up until the very time of birth to abort a child. Now, I am going to tell you that I cannot believe that I just even said that. And some states appear to be attempting to join the abortion bandwagon. And I don't know all the reasons why this is happening. I mean, I like you, have my own personal judgment about that. I have my own opinion about that. This particular picture that I have before you is not too very long ago on the steps of the Supreme Court. Some were marching basically because of the laws that have in New York that have been attempted to be made legal and have been made legal. And this morning, I want to call something to your attention that I think we need to remember. The issue in Leviticus and the issue in New York and the issue that governments face and individuals face is fundamentally the same. The problem is the devaluing of human life. That's the issue. That was the issue then. That is the issue now. Even this morning in the family report, I put an article in the front page from Mark McCrary that had to do with the value of human life. And that affects the thing that we're talking about this morning. But that everybody has value. Even the My Thoughts article that I wrote this morning about Dabo Sweeney and what he did to help a young man who has Down syndrome and a gift that he gave them. That has to do with one human being understanding the value of another human being. And the problem that a lot of people have today is that they are devaluing the value, really, devaluing human life. And people may try to argue the nuance and the circumstance and the rights and the culture. And my purpose for bringing this lesson this morning is not to argue for or against. I firmly believe what I believe about that. And I believe that most of you, if not all of you, would agree with the position that I take. That every human life, whether in the womb or out of the womb, is God's. And we understand that. But that's not really the purpose of my lesson. Its purpose this morning is not about the immorality of abortion, although I think that is immoral. It is not to raise awareness of the problem. The problem needs not a sermon to raise awareness. We're all very much aware of the issue. And this lesson this morning isn't really to determine and to tell you what Christians should or shouldn't do in reference to the issue. What I want to do this morning is to help us keep our faith and help us keep our sanity in a world that we commonly ask, can it get much worse? Not only to keep our faith, but to keep our appreciation for life and understand that, yes, every life is valuable. My good friend Roger Schaus, who puts out a weekday article in his Jump Starts column that several of you I know get on a daily basis. It's emailed, and if you don't get that and would like it, I can certainly help you with that. I think it's a very valuable tool. He does a great job, I think, helping us understand things from a biblical perspective. But in his Jump Starts on Friday, he made 4 points that had something to do with this issue. The rest of my lesson is about his 4 points, so I took it directly from him. I don't mind telling you that. He's good, and it helps me when I use good stuff. But I want to talk to you just real briefly about 4 things that he said in reference to this issue. This is not arguing what we ought to do, but it's helping us think through it. These were the 4 things that Roger mentioned in his article on Friday. He said, we need to remember that God is still God. He was in Leviticus 18. You know, as bad as that is, and as quickly as I believe God could have put an end to what was going on when His own people were sacrificing their children to Molech, He could have put an end to that immediately. He could have, but He didn't. He let that continue, and I'm sure because of His bigger purpose and bigger picture and how He understood life to be, because He is God and I'm not, He let it go. And He's letting it go now, at least to some degree. But He is still God. And the souls of innocent babies aren't forgotten by heaven. We need to remember that. They have committed no sin. Therefore, they do not find themselves apart from God. They find themselves with God. There is salvation. They are saved. I think very clearly I can say that. He will take care of them. And while that doesn't eliminate the problem, nor does it eliminate maybe a possibility or a need that I have to try to help the problem, I need to understand that He is still God. Nothing's changed with that. And so He understands, and He's taking care of those who, as hard as it is to say, those human lives who are being taken. Secondly, Roger said, and I agree, he said, there's no depth to wickedness and shamefulness. There is always another issue that rears its ugly head to question morality. Isn't that the case? Abortion has been around for a long time. The taking of human life has been around a long time. But that has, at some point, kind of taken itself off the back burner. I don't even know if that's a way to say that, but maybe the intensity of it sometimes lacks a little bit. And so there are other things, such as same-sex marriage. And now, at least in some circles, the issue has become, in a more public manner, the idea of transgenderism. And a human being who is born as a female or male, trying to determine whether or not he or she is what he or she is that God has made them, and thinking they have the choice to change that. So we all, as we look at these things, we ask ourselves, what is next? What is next? And I would suggest that once respect and reverence for any part of life is missing, you know what happens? All life is at stake. Every life, once any respect and reverence for any part of life is missing, then all life is at stake. Any life at any time. Because men become the moral judge. And it has to do with what their minds dictate. That's exactly what happens with issues like abortion and same-sex marriage and transgenderism. It is determined, at least in the minds of some people, what is it that man's morality determines is correct. And government tends to lend itself toward that idea. That is what's happening. Now, I don't know to the degree to which all that is being manifested. Some would say strongly, some would say not as strong, but the issue is it's there. But men become the judge in their minds. And so I'll tell you what you all know, that we don't know where it stops, if it stops, when it stops. And I suppose that there may come a point in time when somebody says, I don't like big, tall, fat people, especially men, that I'm in trouble. We laugh at that, but the fact of the matter is, if somebody decides that, who is in a position to dictate law, that can happen. There is no depth to wickedness and shamefulness. And then, a little bit to go with the first one, I would just suggest, as Roger did, that God knows all that is going on. How do I know that God knows everything going on? How do we know that? Because God knows everything, right? Now, I don't understand all that because I don't know everything and I'm not God. Now, you didn't need me to say that, but that's the fact of the matter. God knows everything. He is omniscient. And judgment is coming, and judgment is coming in His time. The fact that He is patient is amazing to me. But it's not just the fact that He's patient on those who would kill the young. The amazing thing to me is that He's patient with me. And that He's patient with you. We may not fall into the category as some of the people we're talking about today, but folks, in terms of our guilt before God, we are the same. And so we may ask, can it get worse? And the answer is yes, it can. But God knows everything, and God will take care of it again in His time. And then finally, what Roger suggested in his short article was that moral and godly people need to do what they can to help. When a moral concern continues to be brought before people of God, people who have morals, moral people need to do what they can do. And I think the best way to say that is moral people need to do like me, need to do what I can do and what you can do. Now, this is not a sermon on activism. That's not my role. That's not this pulpit's role. That's not this church's role. Not in this sense, I don't believe. But I can help people come to grips with their need for somebody that can solve the kinds of problems that we're talking about today. We're talking about sin in all this, and we're talking about sin's solution. And the only solution that I know to preach and to tell people about is the solution that Jesus offers, which is Himself. We were reminded of that by Brian this morning in his thoughts before we took the Lord's Supper together. But again, I think I can say it this way, and I want to be careful how I say this. But whatever activism that I choose for myself, and as a Christian, as somebody who does believe in God, as somebody who does believe in the morals of the Bible, between right and wrong and sin and righteousness, as someone who does believe that, it seems to me that I do have some personal obligation to help with that. Now what that is, I don't know. And I'm certainly not here to volunteer what I'm going to do, if I'm do anything more than what I'm doing, or to ask you, to encourage you to as well. I'm not here to do that. But changing laws, regardless of the positions we may take, will do limited good. It'll only do so much good. I'm not suggesting that we don't do that at all. I think you know me well enough. You've heard me preach long enough to know that I'm not suggesting that seeking to change laws is not something that I as an individual should or ought to do. Personally, I think it is. But I think what I need to do more than anything else is I need to share Jesus. I think I need to share who He was. I think I need to share who He is now. And I think I need to share who He ultimately will be. And maybe the better way to say that is ultimately who I will be and who we will be. And that may sound too simple, but that seems to be, to me, to be the best activism. I think we sometimes fail in our pursuit to try to correct some of the things that have gone amiss and wrong in our world because of our approach to those kind of things. And I think what I'm saying this morning is as we have opportunity, we need to help people see that these things, even that we've talked about this morning, they're not godly things. They're not godly things. They're immoral things. They are things that God was not only displeased with in the Old Testament, but it's the kind of things that I'm confident He is displeased with in the 21st century. And so may we value human life. And may we not get caught up like God's people of old. May we not get caught up in their culture. May we not, in essence, dance with the Canaanites. May we be people who are convicted about what is right and what is wrong, about what is godly and about what is ungodly. And may we share our voice in whatever way we can to accomplish a higher purpose and a higher goal. And may we do what we can ultimately, folks, to help people find the greatest need that they have, and that is the need to solve their sin problem, which is found through Jesus Christ. Well, that's my lesson this morning. It may be that we need to talk more about some of these issues, and I'm certainly not opposed to that. I'm for that, if that's something that we need to do. If we need to understand the rightness or the wrongness about some of these things, then that is an issue that we need to talk about. And maybe that is something I need to cover at another point in time. But that's not, in essence, the purpose of this lesson. The purpose in the lesson today is just to remind us that God is always God, And God's taking care of those who are innocent. And we must do what we can to try to help in any way that we can. And I pray that we will. As always, at the end of a lesson, I want to encourage people to respond to Jesus. He is the only solution. He's the only hope of the world, and I don't know any better way to say that. I could say it louder, I could say it faster, I could say it stronger, but it still means the same thing. Jesus is the only hope of the world. And if you're without Him today, you need to do something about that, because if you don't, you're going to die in your sins, and you're going to go to hell as well. That's the bottom line, folks. Jesus said, if you don't believe in me, you're going to die in your sins. And if you die in your sins, the only ultimate place for you to be is with the father of lies, the devil himself. We don't want that. God certainly doesn't want that. And He wants to help you, but it's a choice that you have to make. May we help you today make that decision. If we can, come as we stand and as we sing.
Softly and tenderly